Connect Africa.
Greetings everyone, welcome to Connect Africa, welcome to the show. This is a platform where we bring social, economic and political issues of Africa and decolonize knowledge based on research. Today we are going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's economy, and for this we have invited Dr. Akinyinka Akinyoade from Leiden University, who will be joining us online in a second. Please stay with us. Thank you, Dr. Inka. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the show. So for our audience, Dr. Akeem Inka Akinyoade, but I call him Dr. Inka, is a senior researcher at Leiden University, and he's also a lecturer. His research area covers population development, migration, entrepreneurship, health, I think, also technologies and social engineering. These are the few amongst others. And his research area in general also covers the western and eastern part of the continent. So he's a senior Africanist researcher at Leiden University in the Netherlands. I'm really pleased to have you here. Welcome to the show. So the reason you're welcome. The reason that we are meeting today is actually to talk about the pandemic COVID-19 and its impact on Africa's economy. I would like to start from this. It looks like a very simple question, but I think it still has to be explained. Here is the thing, the pandemic COVID-19 is affecting the entire population of the world and the world economy as well. But if we see really Africa is still at the lowest rate, like it's not really hit that hard, maybe not yet, when we see it relatively from with other parts of the world like Europe and America. Why are so many analysts and even the international media also is predicting that Africa will be hit, like the devastation will be very high on Africa's economy. Why is that? And also how, if so?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the program. At a time like this, very strange times for everybody worldwide, for the very solid reason that there's a pandemic and it's not limited to just one geographic location. Interestingly, just like you said, it's affecting Africa, but at a lower extent. Mm-hmm. But it has implications. And I will start my implications from the publication of the African Development Bank in 2018, when the president of the bank said, African economies have been resilient and it is gaining momentum. That was January 2018. Mm. And looking at what had happened in 2017, African economy grew 3.6% on the average. And as it is gaining momentum, it's going to increase actually to like 4.1% for 2018 and 2019. At the end of 2019, then the COVID happened. Mm. And this has thrown some spanner in the works of African economic growth. Because the president of the World Bank based the projections, the positive projections, on about two things or four things. First, that we would deepen investment in agriculture. Mm-hmm. Two, and we'll use that investment in agriculture to also improve agricultural value chains. That is, simply put, the supply chain. We're going to improve it. And if this is done, African economy is going to really boom. Mm. Now, COVID has happened, and it's actually impacting on these two areas. Of course, the lockdown in many African countries is not total lockdown, it's partial lockdown. Urban areas are locked down. Rural areas are still working, so to speak. So one would expect that agricultural production is going on.
Yeah, true.
But no, because for many parts of Africa, the period January to April is what we call the dry season. When you look at the weather patterns, we have two simple seasons, the dry season or the rainy season.
Yeah.
So in the dry season, not much goes on in the farms. So it looks a bit still okay. But then the problem now happens when the wet season, the rainy season, which is just about now, starts. This is the time for planting. This is the time for land preparation and planting the seeds for agricultural production. Because the rainy season, because most of Africa's agriculture is still rain-fed, the rainy season will bring the necessary moisture for plant growth. Now, there is restriction of movement. There is partial lockdowns, which will affect many things. One, it will affect the way farmers get access to seeds for planting. Mm-hmm. It will affect even transportation to the farms, either for land preparation, for farming season, or for the planting itself. Therefore, looking ahead in the medium term, at least for this year, the planting, the agricultural yield is going to be affected once the planting season is affected. So we are not going to it is likely we will not have the amount of yield we are expecting from agricultural production. So that's the first thing. If we are not going to get the yield, then it impacts also on markets. Mm. Because at the market is where you sell your products, whether the local market or the international market. Now at the local market, because of lower harvests, so smaller amount of food is likely to enter the market. Because of impaired transportation, the way food will enter the market is going to be affected. Therefore, we are likely to see in the future a problem regarding food security. In the sense of the availability of food, the accessibility of food is going to be impacted negatively because farmers did not plant. Mm-hmm. Now the struggle is this. At the international level, many African countries are still raw material producing countries. This is the time for producing the materials that are going to be exported, especially when they are not cash crops. If this is severely impacted beyond what we are seeing now, then the capacity to actually export raw materials, unprocessed foods, is going to be impacted. And therefore, this impacts on the earnings, because you cannot sell, therefore you cannot earn money. So in a private sense and the international sense, there will be problems. Moreover, at this point where international transport chains have been affected, you barely have countries flying, planes flying from one country to the other. Yeah. You still have some ships moving, fine. So cargo is affected. So there's a big problem. The third problem is a problem that when we even have production, the mere fact that the supply chain has been impacted upon negatively means we cannot ship raw material, raw goods, fresh foods that needs to get to the market. We cannot ship them anymore, or we ship them in smaller quantities. Fresh foods spoil easily, as we all know. So it's going to be a problem, even not only for production, the productivity, not only for the markets, but also for storage. Where do we store freshly produced food? So all this is going to impact negatively, in my assumption now, on the economic performance, both privately and nationally.
Okay. Here is my thinking when you talk about the transportation of the raw materials or the processed food, whether it's a local market or internationally. Had it been that, for example, the free trade area in Africa, which a few months ago is agreed upon between the state leaders or between the African states, it's still in the infant stage of implementing, but in my assumption, okay, like let's say in my mind, the Africa's economy will be impacted high. Yes, okay, most of our economy depends on agriculture, but also we are dependent on the economy with other countries, our trade relation with other countries, we are importing or exporting. Mostly we are importing, I know, but also we are exporting raw materials. Had it been that this African trade area has been materialized and there was a fair trade between African countries and Africa was more dependent, the countries are more dependent between the states in Africa, do you think this COVID-19 will impact that much on Africa? Could it have been a savior or will it still be the same? If not, also, now when it is implemented, what kind of lesson they can take out of this?
The African Free Trade Agreement is still in infancy, as you rightly pointed out. And then whatever the trade agreement that is in operation, whether it is Africa Free Trade, whether it is World Trade, or whatever kind of policy, as long as restrictions are still in place on borders of countries, as long as borders are not opened, trade cannot occur. International trade needs international borders to be opened. So if it is not open, really, no matter the kind of trade agreement which we have, it will not work. Yes, some countries are opening up their societies gradually. Ghana just lifted there last week. A few other countries are also planning lifting restrictions on movement of persons, but they have still not lifted any restrictions on international movement or sub-regional movement. So whether it is ECOWAS trade agreement, whether it is the East African Communities Agreement or the African Communities Agreement or international agreements, as long as borders remain closed, trade will not happen. What is happening now that we see is still the opportunities for what countries are opening up to now are the opportunities to receive testing kits, personal protective equipment, nothing related to trade. It's much more for support in how to even fight the COVID first before we think of what next regarding the trade agreement.
Now, as we know, China is, the hardest hit because of this COVID-19, and China is the biggest trade partner with Africa. How does that impact now related to economy on both sides?
It's still it is impacting still. There's been restrictions. Yes, China has stepped up efforts to donate kits, protective equipment to African countries. Jack Ma, the Alibaba man, has also done his own support, philanthropic support to countries. It is still much more from the earth perspective. Ethiopian Airlines is still flying to China. It still goes regular flights to China. But then what we are seeing is that African entrepreneurs that have gone to China on their own private trade endeavors, many have been restricted in China, their movements are restricted, as we have been hearing in the news, because China is still focused on the health implications of people entering its country or people leaving its country. So we see restrictions first on part of entrepreneurs, either from Africa to China or from China to Africa. We see slight opening in terms of China's support to Africa for health services improvement, particularly related to the COVID. Therefore, for now, the relationship between China and Africa is not so much more on economic trade, but only really for what each of the continent Africa or the country China can still be safe in terms of health reasons for the COVID. That is where the effort is still for now, mostly.
One thing that we have witnessed ever since the emergence of COVID-19 is actually in Africa, you see this emergence of local manufacturers. Like it's still in terms of supplying medical supplies like masks, and also ventilators. You know, there are those manufacturers who churned themselves over weeks or few days into producing masks, and also young innovators coming up by innovating using local materials, ventilators for COVID-19 patients. Really, and this is really interesting. And taking this, what kind of lesson Africa can take? You know, the health sector has been neglected for decades and decades. You know, our leaders have been focusing on something else now that they see what the consequence of it. So what kind of lesson, whether it's the society or in terms of the state level, what kind of lesson can we take? We do so. We are able to produce those things locally, and we were still dependent. Oh, we cannot import because now we cannot fly this and that. What is the lesson we can take out of this in terms of changing, in terms of taking opportunity out of challenge?
Okay, at this point, one should commend the efforts and innovations of various producers and entrepreneurs in Africa who have taken up the challenge to start the local production of masks and protective equipment. But that is as far as their appreciation goes. Because what Africa needs from this point onwards is that now that COVID has come, now that this pandemic is here, it is not restricted to any region. It is actually worldwide, it is Africa-wide. What African governments and entrepreneurs need to now do is to ensure that there should be a big level of self-sufficiency in the production of all these materials that we have been used to importing. What does it take to create a mask? What does it take to have the mask in readiness for use, for immediate use? What does it take to project forward that in the next 4 or 5 years, this is the amount of protective equipment hospitals will need. This is the amount of ventilators hospitals will need. Which part of the production process does Africa, countries, regions, and states have the competitive advantage? These are the areas we need to now start strengthening and planning ahead, such that whenever we have situations like this, planning ahead planning ahead puts us in a position so that we are not going to be doing knee-jerk processes, knee-jerk reactions, and waiting for other countries to donate to us.
Yeah.
We have seen the problems that have occurred even in the most developed societies, where suddenly they realize that there should be a reliance on production from outside because they had cut costs, they had cut subsidies, they had cut financial support that needed to be given to producers within the country. So what part of our annual budget shall we dedicate to the support of this kind of entrepreneurs to enhance productive capacity, storage capacity, and to actually enhance logistics regarding distribution of these equipments? Let us remember that what is being done now by the entrepreneurs we are seeing from Africa, their support is still few and far in between. We need a larger scale effort. These are the kind of lessons we are learning, and these are the kind of things we need to now put in process regarding policy as we move forward, even as immediately as.
Yeah, that's great. So planning ahead is not the most important thing.
Yes, planning ahead and giving the necessary logistic support for producers, for inventors, for multipliers, and for the supply chain.
What can we, this brings us towards the conclusion of the interview. So what can we expect? You explained to us how it will be affected in various ways. What can we expect now? What will be the consequences, and what will be Africa's position? We have been dependent on aid for years, but still, what will be? What are the consequences? Like 1, 2, 3? Is it okay? Agriculture is the most affected sector. Hunger throughout the continent, and what others?
The consequences are not good. I mean, even by the word consequences. The prognosis is not that good, especially when we look at one in agriculture. Once agricultural productivity is affected, food availability is affected. 2, agriculture remains one of the largest employers of labor in Africa. Many people are engaged in it. Therefore, if they cannot earn enough income from agriculture this year, it's going to affect the gains we have made regarding poverty reduction. It's going to throw people back into lower earnings. And it's going to throw communities back, nations back into requesting once again for food aid. And remember, food aid is coming from countries whose productivity is also affected right now, who would want to also support their own countries first before thinking of others outside. So, as we are thinking of this in terms of food availability, food security, as we are thinking of this in terms of income earning in the informal sector, African governments must immediately, we don't have to wait until the COVID is over.
Yeah.
Right now, plans and processes must be put in place. How do we forestall food unavailability, potential food unavailability? How do we going to ensure income loss by farmers and people working in the agricultural supply chain? How do we ensure that they are not going to be adversely affected by loss of income, potential loss of income? So the plans must be put in place now. These are real. They are not imagined. We are entering the planting season. Agriculture starts now. And if it does not start now, we have problems in the future.
That's very Clear. Thank you very much, Dr. Inka, for your time and for shedding light on how this is affecting the continent. Really, thank you very much, and I hope we will meet again.
Thank you very much for having me. Please keep safe and stay safe.
Thank you. Same here. You stay safe. So that was Dr. Inka giving us some interesting analysis on the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's economy. I hope this had shed some light on our understanding as to how the pandemic COVID-19 is impacting Africa's economy and will impact in a great deal, unfortunately, Africa's economy in the future. If you like this interview, please subscribe to our channel for more videos and give it thumbs up. And I would also like to hear your feedback. Until next time, peace.